Or you could do this. And do it with me.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Welcome back.
Welcome back to our YouTube channel.
My name is Kathy.
My name is Celeste. And today, Kathy is going to tell me a wild story. I'm really excited. And I don't know what it is, but I'm looking forward to it. Oh, tell me everything.
Oh my god, so today I'm going to be telling you guys about the abductions of Betty and Barney Hill.
Abductions?
Abductions.
Like alien abductions?
Mm-hmm. This was the first documented case of alien abductions in the entire world.
Holy cow.
Mm-hmm. And my sources were, this is no surprise, but the Mysterious Radio podcast, because K-Town is the best host and also just talks to really interesting people. But yeah, so I used that. And then also this documentary called Alien Abduction, Betty and Barney Hill. And you can watch this on Discovery Plus.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's a really good story. It's really fun. And it's really cool because both the documentary and the podcast feature Kathleen Marden, who is the niece of Betty. And she was 13 when all of this happened.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it's really cool. So K-Town in the podcast interviews Kathleen, and so she's telling the story. But then in the documentary, Kathleen narrates the story a lot of the time.
Wow.
So it's really, really cool.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and Kathleen actually goes on to become a paranormal investigator.
What?
She becomes an author. She becomes an expert in the case of her aunt and uncle's abduction. So it kind of domino affects, you know, her starting into this whole route of becoming a UFO investigator, which is really, really cool. Yeah. So I want to give a little bit of background. So this story happens in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in 1961. This is New Hampshire's oldest settlement, and it's mostly known for its fishing industry and its heavy military presence and also its beautiful beaches. So, yeah. So Betty, she was a social worker, and she also helped with child adoptions. She was really opinionated, she was really kind, she just really wanted to be a part of the world. She was a really cool lady. Mm-hmm. And she eventually was promoted as a supervisor, and she was white. So,
okay.
And then Barney, he was so freaking smart. He had an IQ of 140. He actually wanted to become an engineer, but he was black. And at the time, people just kept telling him that there was no way that he could be an engineer because he was black. And so eventually he gave up on that dream and he decided to join the army. And he was in the army up until right before World War II started.
That sucks.
Yeah. And then he became wounded and he ended up working for the post office for a long time. So Betty met Barney in Hampton Beach, which was pretty close to Portsmouth. She would actually work there during the summers, and her friends knew Barney, and so that's how those two became a thing. And in Hampton Beach, Betty owned an apartment that she would rent out to tourists. And so she told Barney, hey, if you and your family ever come back, I can totally let you stay there. And so that's kind of how the relationship started. And then they were dating, and eventually they got married, and he moved to Portsmouth to be with her.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah. And they were one of the few biracial couples in Portsmouth. And at the time, there was a large population of black folks in Portsmouth, but it was still very much racist. It was like super racist still, you know?
Ooh.
And both Betty and Barney were activists in the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And that it's a civil rights organization formed in 1909 as an interracial endeavor to advance justice for African Americans by a group including W.E. Du Bois, Mary White Ovington, Moorfield Story, and Ida B. Wells. So both of them were really big on anti-racist activism and the whole civil rights movement, which is really, really cool.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Here's a picture of them. And they had a wiener dog named Delcy.
No, they did it.
They did. This is them.
Oh my.
Look at them.
That's Stealthy?
That's Delcy.
Oh, she's
Look
a
at her.
big
She's
girl.
a big chunky girl.
Oh my god, they're so cute.
I know. And it's really cool because obviously the documentary has a narrator, you know, but a lot of the time the story is being narrated by Kathleen. And also they feature Ben Hansen, who was a federal agent that ended up becoming a UFO investigator, which I think is pretty freaking cool. Yeah. And I want to give a little bit of background information about the trip and why they were there. So on September 19, 1961, they're coming back from their trip to Niagara Falls. When Betty and Barney first got married, they didn't have the chance to go on their honeymoon, so this was kind of like making up for it. Oh. And Niagara Falls was about 4 hours away from where they lived. And it was a super spontaneous trip. Barney actually surprised Betty with it, and it was on a Friday. It was so spontaneous that they didn't even have time to go to the bank and get money, so all they had was $78 for the entire weekend, but they didn't care. They were like, let's just go and have a good time. And so they did, and they had a really good time.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute.
I know. And then it was over, so then it's 2 a.m. and they're driving back. And it's so cool because a lot of the documentary is a recording of Betty and Barney telling the story. And it's so cool because this happened like 80 years ago. Wow. So the fact that you hear it, it's you know, it's coming
like
from
them.
Yeah, from them. It feels like they're telling you the story.
I love that.
And so at this point, Barney is telling the story. He says that they were traveling down Route 3 on the highway and they arrived to Lancaster, New Hampshire. And Betty was like, Barney, look at this star. She had been watching it from the car with her binoculars. And in the interview, Betty tells Alan that as she was watching it, the star seemed to get bigger and brighter. And so the whole drive, she was pretty much just watching the star. And so they both decided to get out of the car and take a look at it. So they're getting out of the car, they're looking at it, and Barney tells Betty it's probably just a satellite, you know, no big deal. And Betty had never seen a satellite before, so she was like, maybe it is. But then she was like, I don't know if it's a satellite because it's not behaving like one. So she passes the binoculars to Barney and he takes a look. And at this point they realize, oh my gosh, this is not a satellite because it seems to fly away from them. It goes west and then it comes right back almost as if it's going towards them. And keep in mind, Barney is a super analytical man. He's really smart. He's very skeptical. He doesn't believe in aliens or paranormal things or anything like that. Oh. And so at this point, his brain is trying to come up with a logical,
explanation.
Answer. Yeah. And so he's like, maybe it's a fighting jet. Maybe it's a military thing, some kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just kind of scary. And at this point, he sees that it's coming, this thing is coming back at them with a rapid speed. And so he's like, oh my God, we need to get out of here. So they run into the car and they start driving. And he really puts a pep in his step. Like he really starts going fast,
Yeah.
And
he's like freaked out.
Yeah. Oh. And privately, he says that this was freaking weird, but he didn't want to scare Betty. So he was like, no big deal, babe. Let's just go home. It's not a big deal. And so they're driving south, and up until now, this thing is pretty far away from them, but now it seems to be getting closer. Oh. And at this point, they realize that whatever this is seems to be interested in them specifically.
Oh my gosh.
Because there are no other cars on the highway, and it looks like it's following them,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and at this point, Betty is telling the story, and she says that it followed them for about 30 miles, and when they got to an area in New Hampshire called Indian Head, it left the top of the mountain, and then it came out over the highway and stopped midair, like right on the highway above them.
Oh my gosh, 30 miles? That's like a 45 to 50 minute drive, I guess, depending on how fast you drive.
Yeah, and he was stepping on it, but still, that's a long time for something to be following you.
Yeah.
30 freaking miles?
30 miles?
Yeah.
I would be so scared.
I know. I would be pooping my pants.
Yeah, same.
And at this point, Betty starts telling the story, and she says that it was a metallic disc, the width and length of a commercial airline, and it's as flat as a pancake, and it's now hovering directly over them, like over the road. And at this point, they were both stunned, but they had nowhere to go. And Barney says that at this point, he felt this sort of need to find out what it is, to get rid of it, to sort of figure it out, to like take care of him and Betty. And so he decides to get out of the car.
No!
Yeah, so he feels this sense of duty and he decides to get out of the car. He brings the binoculars over and he's walking into the field that's next to the highway until he's directly under it. He says it's about 100 feet over him. And he says that he takes his binoculars, he's looking at it, and that's when he sees them. In this craft, there's windows, and through the windows, he sees 9 to 11 gray beings. And they all have the same shiny black metallic uniform. And he's looking at them, and it almost looks like the craft is tilting towards him at this point, and he sees the beings. And then almost instantly, he sees that all of them, except one, start walking away from the window. And the one that's still standing there, he's reaching up, and it looks almost like he's pulling some levers or pushing some stuff, like pushing buttons or pulling some levers, something like that. Yeah, and it's crazy because they had the shiny black uniforms, and they had gray skin, and they had big, large black eyes that wrapped around to the side of their face. So,
oh my gosh, that is so freaky.
I know. And once the one was pressing all the levers or whatever, it seemed like these little red lights started coming out of the craft, almost like in a fin-like position, like little fins with little red lights. And at this point, he's like, oh my freaking God. And he drops the binoculars and he starts running to the car.
Oh my God.
And in his own words, he's like, I was screaming to Betty, oh my God, Betty, this is going to capture us. And he somehow knew that they were going to capture him, like, quote, a bug in a net. And at this point, he's freaking out. He's hysterical. He's trying to escape. So they're driving, and he was really, really upset. But at the same time, he was telling Betty to try and see if she could see it. And so she rolls down her window, and it's pitch black. She can't see anything, which is weird. No stars or anything. Like, she can't see anything. It's pitch black.
What the heck?
And so she starts rolling up the window, and she says as soon as she finishes rolling up the window, they both hear some kind of beeping in the back of the car. And Barney says it sounds like a tuning fork being struck and placed against them. Quote, a very subtle type vibration. And suddenly they both feel tingling all over their body. And then there's silence. And then it's almost as if they're suspended in a dream.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh,
and then they hear a series of beeping again, except they didn't see anything this time. And then they were back to their full consciousness. So they didn't feel like they were in a dream or hazy or anything like that. So they're driving, and they realized that they were 35 miles away from where they were originally. So they're 35 miles past, but they don't remember getting there. They have no memory of getting there. Barney describes it as a void when he tries to think of what happened for that time. And at this point, they were discussing what just happened, and Betty turns to Barney and she's like, well, do you believe in flying saucers now? And his response was, oh, don't be silly. Of course not.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Barney.
I know. And in the documentary, they talk about how sometimes when people experience something extraordinary or something that just simply can't be explained, especially if they're a skeptic, they'll be in denial because their brain literally can't wrap itself around the fact that something like that just happened. Yeah. So it makes sense that he would be in denial because he totally wasn't the type to believe in any of this, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. I probably would do the same, honestly.
Yeah. So then they proceed to just go home, and they don't really talk during the ride home. Eventually they get home and it's sunrise. By the time they get home, it's all, you know, sunny and stuff. And they just feel like creeped out and confused, you know? So the dress that Betty was wearing, it was the first time that she ever wore it. She had just bought it and it had a tear on it. And she just felt super creeped out, and so she just took it off and she never wore it again. She put it in her closet and she just never wore it again.
Oh, wow. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And at this point, Barney is feeling just super confused and off-put about the whole thing. And they both feel like they were contaminated, almost as if they were exposed to something that they shouldn't have been.
Oh,
yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, and Betty was super curious about what had happened. She wanted to understand what they experienced, you know?
Yeah.
And Barney, he completely disagreed. He wanted to just forget about it. He didn't understand it, and he didn't really care to. He was just like, whatever. It was eating at him, though.
Denial.
He was in denial. And despite him not wanting to face what happened, it still super stressed him out. It was eating at him.
Yeah, that makes sense. That must be so traumatizing. Even if you tried to rationalize it and you were like, oh, it couldn't have been aliens, and you're like, maybe it was something psychological, it still wouldn't be something that you'd be comfortable with. It would be really unsettling, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the exact same way.
Oh.
So yeah, at this point, Betty's like, I need to know what happened. I need to talk about it, you know?
Yeah.
And Barney disagrees. He's like, I don't think that's smart. I don't think you should tell anybody about it.
Aww.
And Betty's like, no, I have to. And so she calls her sister and she tells her everything. She's like, we saw a flying saucer. Super crazy. So Betty's sister is Kathleen's mother.
Oh, okay. So the niece.
Yeah, the niece, yeah. And at this point, Kathleen starts telling the story, and she says that her neighbor was a physicist. And so Betty asked her sister to ask him to see if he had any advice for her on what she should do. And so the guy, the physicist, told Betty to get a compass and to take it out to the car. And this wouldn't measure any radiation or anything like that, but it would tell them if there was a magnetic field around the car. And so apparently he knew a little something about UFOs.
Oh, yeah.
So Barney starts telling the story at this point, and he says he's reluctant AF, but he's like, all right, I'll do it. And so he takes the compass out there, and at this point, that's where he notices that in the back of the car, there's about 15 to 20 large, shiny like silver spots on the car, almost as if the car was really, really polished in those spots.
What?
They had no particular pattern or anything like that. So that was weird. That's the first time he notices it.
That's weird.
Yeah, so he puts the compass where the shiny spots are, and when he puts the compass where the shiny spots are, the compass becomes erratic, like it starts behaving super erratically.
Oh my gosh.
It's super scary, and they're like, what the hell? Yeah, so that made him think that something was up, you know?
Yeah.
And so at this point, that's when Betty decides that they should notify someone. And so she calls her sister again. And that's when her sister called the former chief of police of Newton, New Hampshire. And he was Kathleen's father's best friend. So he came over and he had a cup of coffee with Kathleen's mom. And he was like, you should tell Betty that she and Barney should report this to the Pease Air Force Base. And because they had notified all of the local police departments that if there were any UFO sightings reported, that it should be reported to them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's almost like maybe they were aware. Ooh, spooky.
Yeah.
That's
So, yeah. So the Pease Air Force Base is the local Air Force base of, like, the closest one to Portsmouth, New Hampshire at the time in 1961. And Betty and Barney knew people in the military then, and so they were able to get a hold of someone. And they were telling him the story, and they weren't super interested initially, which I'm like, why wouldn't you be?
The friend?
Yeah.
Obviously.
Until they started talking about the fin-like things that were coming out of the thing with the little lights, and that's when he got super interested. And the very next day, the captain of the Pease Air Base, Paul Henderson, he calls Betty and Barney and he's like, tell me everything, I want to know all the details. And he takes them super seriously. And that makes Barney feel validated, you know. They were very official about it, they were very serious, and Barney feels like that was the responsible thing to do, was to report it to the Pease Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And that same night, the Hills were told of another sighting that was reported. The officer said that the controller at the tower of the Pease Air Force Base reported an unknown flying object or some kind of unusual craft at 2:14 a.m. the night that the Hills had their experience. And so that at that point, the Hills are like, I wonder if that's related. I wonder if that was what got us, you know?
Yeah. Ooh.
It's so
so
creepy.
scary.
And the following day, Kathleen, the niece, and her family made the trip over to Portsmouth, so they drove over. And Kathleen was super excited because she had heard of the story, but it was finally the time that she would get to hear it herself, you know?
Yeah.
And so they drive over to Portsmouth and they get there, and Barney doesn't really care to be part of the conversation because it just stresses him out. He doesn't want to.
He's disturbed.
Yeah.
How old is Kathleen at this time?
Oh, Kathleen is 13 when this happens.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they go over and they all sit around the table and Betty tells them everything. And then the family is like, I want to look at the silver spots on the car. And so they go out there and they show them. And at this point, Kathleen goes and tries to rub off one of the silver spots. And her mom grabs her and she's like, don't touch that.
Oh my gosh.
And so she says that was kind of the epiphany that she had, where she was like, I don't know what this is, but it's real. And that's kind of what sets her off into trying to figure out what the frick this is, you know?
Yeah.
It starts her passion in trying to figure this out.
Ooh.
Yeah, so several days after this encounter, Betty goes to her local library and she checks out a book called The Flying Saucer Conspiracy. conspiracy. And in the book, it talks about government cover-ups, interplanetary wars, hundreds of recorded reports of military officials about UFO sightings, all this like super interesting stuff.
Wow.
And it's important to note that during the 40s and 50s, the government really wanted to control the public's response to UFO sightings.
Oh.
So there was actually an official government policy in place that was put there to ridicule anybody that reported UFO sightings or abductions or anything like that. Basically, they wanted to gaslight people into believing that it didn't really happen so that people didn't give them any credibility. This was an actual government policy put into place.
Why? I don't understand why.
There was a lot of reported activity and a lot of frenzy surrounding the topic, and my guess is that the government wanted to control it. They wanted to control how the people felt about it, because if the people actually knew that the government couldn't control this, then they would know that the government isn't in charge.
Oh.
You know? So at this point, I mean, the whole time, Betty is super curious about what this is, you know? She wants some answers.
Yeah.
And Barney is obviously much more skeptical, and he's worried about his reputation because he's so involved in anti-racist activism. He didn't want this story of alien abduction coming out and tarnishing his reputation. Because he was so passionate about the work that he did, you know, he didn't want that to make it so that people don't believe him, you know?
Yeah, he didn't want to lose his credibility.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so 10 days after their sighting, Betty starts having these super vivid, almost nightmarish dreams, and she had them for 5 nights in a row. And in her dreams, there was an encounter with human-like entities that surrounded the car and then took Betty and Barney on the craft, where they did some physical evaluations.
What?
And Betty, she talks about seeing this fiery, bright orb that's in the middle of the forest, like surrounded by trees, and she doesn't know what it is, but she dreams about it, and this will come up later. At this point, she has no answers about what this could possibly be. And yeah, and then in another interview with Betty and Barney and their chunky wiener dog, Delcy, Betty describes what happened on the craft, and she has this really cute raspy voice. But she says, quote, "First, they took Barney into one room, and I went into a second room. In this room, they did what I would call a fairly simple physical examination. They seemed to have mostly interest in my skin. I had the idea that they were taking pictures of my skin. Also, interest in my hands and feet. They also did a test, which they would call checking my nervous system. Throughout the whole examination, it would be like picking up some kind of strange animal and looking it over, giving it a checkup, and putting it back down without any intentions of harming it." And so that was sort of the vibe that she got, you know.
Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah. And with the dreams and the buzzing and the lights, it was too much that Betty just could not ignore it, you know what I mean? She was just like, I can't. She was wondering if these dreams represented reality, if those dreams represented what happened during that time that she can't remember, you know?
Yeah.
And she had written down all of her dreams in her journal. Betty decides to type down all her dreams and type it on a typewriter. And because she was a social worker, she had studied psychology, and she knew that dreams a lot of the times were made up of fantasy, but a lot of the times they could be based off of factual events, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, Betty was just not ready to let this go, and so she writes a letter to General Kehoe about this, asking for help, and this gets the attention of NICAP, which is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And per their records, a similar-looking craft had been reported flying over California, Kentucky, and Indiana. And it's important to note that NICAP during this time, in the 50s and 60s, was one of the only legit organizations dedicated to the scientific study of UFOs. So they brought in scientists, medical professionals, and they had a really rigid way of testing all of these things. They were very serious about it. They were very scientific, you know, so it was really cool. But so in October of 1961, a Boston-based NICAP investigator, Walter Webb, interviews the Hills in their home in Portsmouth. He wanted to know as much detail as possible. He wanted to know, you know, if the craft behaved a certain way after it was being noticed by them. He wanted to know exactly where this happened. He wanted to know absolutely everything that they could remember.
Wow.
And so Walter, he interviewed them separately, and it's interesting because Walter said that he believed them because their stories lined up to the T exactly when they were interviewed separately. And he also says that these people, they were involved involved in a lot of civil rights stuff, but they were also involved in politics. And they were also really respected members of the community, so they didn't have anything to gain. Rather, they had a lot to lose by coming out with this story.
Oh,
and
wow.
So he believed them, and a lot of other people believed them because they were like, why would they lie, you know?
Yeah, like they have literally everything to lose. Why would they lie?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And so a few weeks after Walter interviewed them, another set of investigators named Homan and Jackson came to talk to the Hills and interviewed them as well. And at this point, a startling revelation is made. So Barney is talking to them, and he says that, so the drive should have only taken 4 hours, right? It took 6 hours. They should have gotten home around like 4 a.m. or something, but they ended up coming home when the sun was coming up. And so that's when they realized that both Betty and Barney had these 2 hours that were completely unaccounted for, where they suffered temporary amnesia. And Barney's the one that's telling this, and he's like, I don't even believe in this crap, you know? It's crazy. How highly improbable is it that both of us got amnesia for 2 hours at the same time, you know?
Yeah.
Like, there's just no logical explanation for this.
Oh, wow.
And so at this point, they both have so many questions about what actually happened.
Yeah.
And they even go back to White Mountain where the abduction happened to try and see if they could trigger their memory or something. So they go back and nothing comes to them. They're just left with more questions. They're just left perplexed. And this abduction understandably takes a toll on their relationship over the years because neither of them can explain it.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know. And
That sucks because it seems like they were really in love.
Yeah.
And it seems also like Barney just didn't want to believe it because it's just like so traumatizing.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the people in the documentary said that it really is like a love story because they just both loved each other so much. And Barney loved Betty so much to the point where he was also trying to figure it out because it meant so much to her, kind of thing. And also because it was eating him up, you know?
Oh.
And Barney got a freaking ulcer because he was so stressed about all of this. And he was worried about it getting worse. Like, it already was getting worse. And
His
so,
ulcer?
Yeah. And so he decides to go see a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist is like, yeah, dude, probably your ulcer is getting worse because of all the stress.
Yeah.
And so he recommends another psychiatrist who's based out of Boston. And this guy's name is Dr. Benjamin Simon. And he's a very prominent guy, very skilled in regressive hypnotherapy. And this was 2 years after the abduction, by the way.
Okay.
But yeah, so Betty and Barney make the trip to go see Dr. Simon, and Dr. Simon developed this technique with hypnosis to help people that were coming back from the war that suffered psychological conditions, and he was actually really successful with it. He had helped a lot of people with his hypnotherapy, and so they were hopeful that he could help them. They went to see him, and he was like, yeah, dude, I'll help you. And so for the next 6 months, he worked with them. And he treated them separately. It's so interesting because they play recordings of the hypnotherapy and also video recordings of this. So, oh my gosh, it really puts you in there.
Oh, wow.
And in an interview, he discusses his experience with the Hills.
Wait, the hypnotherapy that they did or hypnotherapy with other patients?
No, with him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Spooky.
I know.
And so what?
And so in an interview, Dr. Simon is talking about his experience with them. And he says, quote, Barney's symptoms had begun just after they had their sighting. Betty had responded by a series of dreams extending over a week or more of a nightmarish quality. So it seemed that this really involved both of them and their experiences, and I undertook both into treatment and used hypnosis to penetrate what appeared to be an amnesic period with a very vague background. So yeah, Dr. Simon treated them for the next 6 months, and they would be induced and put in a deep trance. They were put back to September 1961, where it happened. So he directed Barney to tell him everything. He put him back during that day. He told him to tell him everything, you know, his experiences, what he saw, what he felt. While under hypnosis, Barney recalls everything, the trip and the drive.
Wow.
And, you know, he's doing it perfectly fine. Things that he was able to recall from his conscious memory already before being put under hypnosis.
So basically he's acting normal, which is good, because if he's under hypnosis and it was all a show, then he would immediately probably start freaking out. But he's like saying the same things that he already had said previously.
Yeah, well, so that happens and he's totally fine. But then when he gets to the part of him looking up at the craft in the field, he starts freaking out and he's super scared. A mental block actually forms and panic sets in, and he's like, Dr. Simon, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And Dr. Simon is is like, it's okay, you're safe. And he just pushes him to continue telling him what he saw. And so Barney continues, and he tells Dr. Simon that he's so scared in the moment when he's looking up at the craft, but he's putting on a brave front for Betty, and that he walks over to see what it is, to get a better look, and they play the recordings of this session.
Oh my gosh.
Barney just sounds terrified. I don't know how you could fake that type of fear. You can just hear it in this man's voice. And also, he was such a skeptic, so I feel like it says a lot about that, you know?
Yeah.
He really didn't believe in any of this.
Yeah, if he didn't believe them, why would he be so scared, kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. So Barney, during this hypno session, he releases a lot of emotion that had been stored, and he recalls for the first time that a powerful force was controlling him. And Dr. Simon asks, what did it tell you? And Barney replies, stay there and keep looking. Just keep looking and stay there. And Barney said that he had to pull the binoculars away from his face, like he had to physically force himself to stop looking because he just felt like something was telling him. And Dr. Simon asks if Barney heard him saying this to him, and Barney replied, he was talking in my head.
What the hell?
And then later, during another hypnosis...
That's so creepy.
I know,
I'm sorry, but that is so creepy.
It's so eerie. And then during another hypnosis session, Barney is talking about how he's driving and then he makes a turn. And he's like, I don't know why I made a turn. I just felt like I had to turn. And so he turns and he's on this dirt road and he's driving. And suddenly he sees this fiery orb, bright fiery orb surrounded by trees, much like the one that Betty described from her dreams. And at this point, he sees the entities standing there at the end of the road. And they're dressed in shiny black uniforms. And then Barney says, it's them. It's the ones I saw when I was standing in the field.
Oh my god.
And then the entities surround them around the car, and there's nowhere for them to go. I'm sorry, but I'm like...
That's so creepy.
I know.
And he's under hypnosis at this point, so it's not something he can come out of.
Yeah, it's
being
like...
hypnotized and then be like, that really sucked. That was scary. Right?
Yeah. Wait, what?
Is he still hypnotized at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he can't, like, come out of hypnosis to be like, that was really scary, and, like, have a moment to talk it out.
Oh,
he
yeah.
just has to, like, go through that
continue
again.
It, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
super
so
intense.
Oh.
And then Betty also had a session about this, and, you know, she's trying to figure out what happened that night. And under hypnosis, Betty remembers everything that she had previously recalled consciously also, you know? And then she remembers Barney taking a sharp turn in the road into a dirt road with tall trees all around. And they were playing the recording of the hypnosis, and she says, quote, I don't know where we are. At the time, I didn't feel afraid. And Dr. Simon says, why are you crying if you're not afraid? And she replies, I was afraid when I saw the men on the road. And she's just bawling, like she's just crying so hard. She says that she's never been so afraid in her entire life.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, so she sees this huge fiery bright orb and she tells Barney, are we being robbed? Like, what is this? Was there an accident? What's going on? And Barney replies, it's them. And Betty just becomes terrified, and she thinks about it, and she puts her hand on the door, and her plan is just to book it out into the field and just, you know, try to survive. And so she opens the door and she wants to go and run, but then she's intercepted by something, and then she loses consciousness.
Oh no.
Yeah. And then the next thing Betty remembers is that the aliens are escorting her through the woods and onto the spacecraft. And in the recording, she says, they're taking me up on the object. I don't want to go on. I don't know what's going to happen if I go on it. I don't want to go. So she goes up the ramp and she's going inside, and they're telling her, there's nothing to be afraid of. We only want to do a few simple tests. You know, you won't be harmed. Nothing will happen to you, and then you'll be on your way. And she's like, yeah, okay. She doesn't trust them, and so she kicks the one that's closest to her.
Oh, wow.
And
good for her.
Yeah. And that's when
when
the tear of her hem dress tears, and then they regain control over her, and she's taken into an exam room on the craft.
Oh my gosh.
And then
And you saw this part where she's hypnotized and she's talking about it? You saw parts of the recording?
I saw parts of the recording where he hypnotized them separately, and then at one point he hypnotized them together, and he's telling them, you're falling asleep, you're falling into a deep sleep, and it shows that part. But the rest of it is just hearing.
Oh.
Yeah. And so she watches them take Barney into the next room, and that's when she meets with someone that she calls the examiner. And he tells her to take off her dress, and before she even has an opportunity to do so, he unzips her dress.
Oh.
And the dress just falls down.
Oh,
and then, yeah, and they use some kind of stylus to press down on her spine, and then they also take some skin samples from her. Isn't that so eerie to think about?
Yeah, dude, that's the thing. That's what it is for me. Aliens, cool. Non-consensual abductions, not cool. Like,
yeah.
if an alien came down and was like, hey, are you cool with us, taking you up there, look at you a little bit, and you were like, yeah, sure, okay, then it's like, it's fine. But the non-consensual part of it just freaks me out.
Yeah, and also being able to consent about what types of tests are done,
Yeah, exactly.
It's not freaking cool.
No.
So they roll her on her back, and the examiner has a long needle, and Betty says this is the longest needle that she's ever seen. And she's like, what are you going to do with that? And he says, it's just a simple test. It's not going to hurt you. And he says that he just wants to put it in her navel, that it's just a simple test. It's not going to hurt her. It's going to be quick. And she's telling him, don't do that. It's going to freaking hurt. Don't do it, And he just keeps telling her, no, it's not going to hurt. And so he sticks the needle into her navel, and it's excruciating. Like, it just hurts so bad. She's crying and yelling, and she's like, please stop, this hurts so bad, stop. And then that's when the leader comes, and he puts his hand over her face, and immediately all of the pain goes away. Like, immediately all the pain just gone, but she's still sore from where they stuck it in. And after they did that, she asks what it was, and they said that it was a pregnancy test. And,
what?
Yeah, and she told them, I don't know what you expected here, but that wasn't a pregnancy test.
That is so weird.
I know, it's so creepy.
Oh, and why do they need to know if she's pregnant? And why would they think that a needle was going to tell them that she's pregnant? I know.
My guess is that they just don't understand the anatomy of humans.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then it's Barney's turn for the examination, and Kathleen is talking about it. So yeah, so he recalls that they give him a physical examination, and they put him on the table, and his clothes are removed, and they're mostly interested in his muscle structure and his nervous system, and they roll him over, and he can feel what seems to feel like a thin metal object going up and down his spine, so kind of like the stylus that Betty was talking about. And he says, I'm afraid to open my eyes because I am being told strongly by myself to keep my eyes closed and don't open them.
Oh my gosh.
I don't want to be operated on. And at this point, Dr. Simon asks, what makes you think of an operation? And Barney says, I don't know. And something was...
I'm scared.
So something was briefly slid into Barney's rectum and was removed rapidly. It wasn't painful. Then some kind of cup-like device was placed over his genitals. Apparently a sperm sample was taken, and then it was over. It was quick. Which goes back to what you were saying. It's one thing to be a part of something like this. It should be consensual. You know what I mean? Like, just the idea of somebody doing such an invasive test, even for scientific purposes, it's not cool, man.
Yeah. And it seems like these aliens specifically do have the ability to communicate with them, because they're like, it's not gonna hurt, you're gonna be fine, it's fine.
Yeah.
So it's like, if they can communicate with them, then why can't they just ask for their consent,
Exactly.
You automatically assume that people wouldn't be okay with it at all, but there are people who literally will consent to anything, especially if it has anything to do with aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
That's the thing. I feel like you can seek someone out that's obsessed with aliens.
Yeah. This guy?
Not the weird.
Yeah,
I am an Aquarius, so I am very interested in a lot of cool things with the Leo moon, but I wouldn't want something so like invasive. Yeah. Or if they wanted like not a sperm sample, but like an egg sample or something, I'd be like, can we do it my human way, and then I will give it to you, sir.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Or if you were like, if it won't hurt and you don't have to see me butt naked, then go ahead. So Aquarius and Gemini things.
Air sign and our drain. So after their examinations, they are escorted back to the car. And in the recording, Barney says that he feels a great relief going back to the car. He's being guided back and his eyes are closed, which is super weird,
Yeah.
I'm guessing they're just holding his arm or something, guiding him back to the car. And then he opens his eyes and the car's right there, so he gets in. And he remembers thinking to himself, how funny, there's just nothing to fear. And then he looks out just in front of him and he sees Betty walking towards the car. And then she gets in and he sees a bright moon in the sky and laughs and says, well, there it goes. And then he turns the lights on in the car and they start driving, and Betty is giggling and asks, do you believe in flying saucers now? And he says, oh, Betty, don't be ridiculous. Of course I don't. And Barney says, I did not want to say what I really believed. I believed that we had seen and been a part of something different than anything I had ever seen before.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it seems like the aliens drugged them or something.
Yeah.
Because they were all like, do-do-do-do-do.
Yeah.
Oh.
Or put them in some kind of trance or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so going back to Dr. Simon, the dude that did their hypnosis, Dr. Simon believed that the best explanation might be that they kind of created the story together, perhaps unconsciously, that Betty might have had stronger feelings about this, about her dreams, and they sort of contaminated Barney's memory. And he said that he wasn't accusing them of lying. He just felt that it was a psychological condition that they sort of created together.
What?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're accusing them of lying.
I know,
Doctor.
I think what he was saying was that he believes that they're being truthful to their truth.
Like they think that this is real, but it's not, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
like it's true to them kind of thing.
Oh, Doctor.
I know. And Betty and Barney, they're super thankful to Dr. Simon. For 2 freaking years, they didn't know what was happening, and finally they know what happened, you know?
Yeah.
And so they're so thankful for it. But at the same time, they don't agree with him. They're like, there's no way we could have made this up. Especially Barney being such a skeptic, and even Betty, she was a freaking social worker, you know?
Yeah.
Like, to them, to Betty and Barney, the fact that their independent storytelling was consistent throughout the entire thing proved that it was real. To them, that was enough, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, at this point, Barney just accepted it, you know, as his experiences being real. And he also felt really validated because he talked to a lot of military personnel, interestingly enough, that also talked about UFO sightings and stuff like that. And so it made him feel a lot better coming to terms with it.
Oh,
and so
good.
At this point, Betty and Barney are like, you know what? We found out the truth. Let's just try to move on with our lives, continue doing anti-racist work, continue living our life.
Yeah.
And that's what they want. And they're determined to keep it private because of how prominent they are in the community. But this does not last long.
Oh, I had a feeling.
Yeah. On October 25th, 1965, this is about 4 years after all of this went down, they were both feeling better, they moved on, da-da-da-da-da. But then, Boston Traveler was a newspaper back then, and they printed a 5-part series about the UFO encounter with Betty and Barney. So this series completely blew the cover off of this story, and it totally was a violation of their confidentiality. The guy that wrote it, his name was John Luttrell, and he was a reporter for the Boston Traveler, and he received confidential information from a snitch friend of Betty's.
Oh no.
And she told him everything. She told him about the whole story. She told him about the hypnosis.
Wow.
She told him everything.
So it was like a story they weren't even intentionally,
exactly.
like they had no intention of putting out to the public.
Exactly, dude. Freaking
Wow.
John Luttrell actually went to the hills before that, and he was like, can you tell me what happened? And they were like, nope, we don't want to talk about it. And he was like, please, it'll just be for my own private information. And they were like, no, dude, I don't want to do that. And so then he found the friend, and then the friend told him everything. And
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's so evil.
it's so grimy. And later in a radio interview, John Luttrell's reasoning was, quote, these people deserved every single consideration, but then where do you draw the line between maintaining a certain degree of personal privacy or the public's right to know? And in making this decision, it had to be made abundantly clear that the Hills themselves did not initiate this with the Boston Traveler.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I don't agree with how he went about it. I can also understand the wanting to tell the public about it type of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I was just about to say. And I also feel like, thank God it did happen, because if it hadn't have happened, then the story wouldn't be known the way it is today.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it also makes it so believable because they had no intention of sharing the story at all.
Yeah.
And then it comes out like this. If they were lying about it and they were just doing it for attention, wouldn't they just go to the Boston Traveler themselves?
Exactly.
Or agree to talk to him?
Exactly. So the whole thing thrusts Barney and Betty into the public light.
Oh.
And it doesn't just affect them, it affects their entire family. They're super prominent members of the society, of the community, you know?
Yeah.
And they're also super close-knit. And so all of them as a family sit down and have a meeting, and Kathleen was there. And they end up deciding as a family that, well, you know what? Your story came out. You should tell it yourself. You should tell your side of the story. And so that's what they go with.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and they end up cooperating with an author named John Fuller, and they write a book called The Interrupted Journey: 2 Lost Hours Aboard a Flying Saucer. And this went worldwide. It was in the New York Times. It was huge. Everybody freaking knew about it because they were the first Americans claiming to be abducted, you know? So it was a huge deal. And it was the first time that hypnosis was used to, recover all of these things. And it was the first time that any of this happened, you know, and this is the first time that the aliens were described the way that they were. So this story is what caused people to know of the aliens as the Greys, you know. When you think of an alien, you think gray skin with the big eyes like that. This is where that came from.
Wow. Probably I don't know for sure, but maybe the influence for the Twilight Zone and stuff like that.
100%.
Wow.
100%.
It's like the Twilight Zone came out in the 1930s.
We're like yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. And it's important to note that the media was different back then, you know. Right now you have 25,000 news media outlets, you know. Granted, they're all owned by like the same couple of people.
Facebook.
But like, you know, Facebook, you have podcasts, you have movies, you have this, you have that. Like there's so many things. We all get our media from different places.
Yeah.
But back then there were so many few channels of media, you know. So the fact that they came onto those channels of media meant that everybody saw
knew,
it,
and everybody saw the same
exactly
thing. Wow.
They actually were featured in a magazine called Look, which was a very popular magazine back then, and this was huge. And this completely overtook Betty and Barney's life. They had to step away from what they were doing with like politics and anti-racist stuff to be able to go on television shows and radio shows. And it was exciting to the family because they felt like this was finally being acknowledged as something that actually happened. People were actually like, okay, I believe you, you know?
Oh, and that must have been so validating for them too. You have everybody being like, did it happen? Well, some people being like, yeah, it happened. And then the doctor being like, this is a figment of your imagination.
Yeah, dude, exactly. And a lot of people didn't believe them. There were a lot of skeptics. There were a lot of people that believed them, but there were just as many, if not more, that were like, you're lying, dude. Aliens? Really? You know?
Yeah.
Your makeup looks really cute, by the way. This whole shabacle, to be a 13-year-old when this happens and to be around when all of this happens, like, I mean, can you imagine? You know? And Kathleen says that she was reading about the story in magazines, newspaper articles. She was hearing about it on radio shows, but the stuff that she was hearing didn't match up with what she remembered happening when she was a little girl. And so that's what made her want to pursue this. So she literally spent the next 40 years trying to figure out what actually happened. Wow. And in the process, she discovered classified documents that were kept a secret and a government conspiracy to hide the truth.
What?
It's like it just keeps getting crazier and crazier. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, and the plot thickens.
So she wanted to look at two different things. The first thing she wanted to look at was the Project Blue Book documents that were recorded at Pease Air Force Base. And this is a little side note. Project Blue Book, it was a code name for the systematic study of unidentified flying objects by the United States Air Force. It was active from March of 1952 to December of 1969 when it was terminated. Oh. That's what Blue Book is when you hear it.
Okay, I've heard of that before.
Yeah, so she wanted to look at that, and then she wanted to look at the documents that were sent to headquarters. So she wanted to find out if there was any further documentation of any additional research that was done by the government regarding this, you know? Mm-hmm. And so Kathleen found a false letter written in 1963 that contradicted Betty and Barney's statements, and this was found in the Project Blue Book report.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. If you remember Betty and Barney, when they went to the Pease Air Force Base, they told them everything that they could remember. This was before the hypnosis, but they told them everything in their conscious memory.
Yeah.
So they told them about how it moved erratically in a zigzag fashion, how it would swoop down. Well, in this letter, it said, quote, no specific details on maneuverability were given.
What?
And the letter said that it was a star-like object at all times and that there was no movement, which is just a flat-out lie.
What?
And honestly, it makes sense that the government would try to cover this up because, like we were saying earlier,
They wanted control.
exactly, they wanted to control the narrative. They, you know, if you find out that the government can't do anything about aliens, and I mean, it takes much less for me to not respect the government, but that's in, you know, like in their eye.
Yeah.
And so,
And probably during the time as well.
During the time,
a lot
yeah.
of people had more trust, maybe.
yeah, exactly. And this is where it gets more interesting too. A little side note, since then, according to an article written by Isis Davis Marks, approximately 2,780 pages of CIA documents detailing the government entity's findings on UFOs are now available for anyone to read and download. It's on a site called Black Vault, and it has a collection featuring UFO-related records declassified by the CIA since the 1980s, and the site's owner, John Greenwald Jr., obtained these newly digitized documents. And so you can literally go online right now and look at all those documents. Like,
what the heck? I wonder why they released it. Like, I don't understand why. If they tried for so long to hide it.
I don't know.
But then at the same time, they did release it, but they also didn't tell anybody that they were going to release it. It wasn't like on the news or anything, probably.
I don't know, and it kills me. Are you just giving us a snippet so that we don't know the rest of what you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
They're like, well, people know at this point, so let's just give them a little taste.
A little taste. That article said that between 1952 and 1969, Project Blue Book recorded more than 12,000 sightings, and that was just from 1952 to 1969. So can you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
And all of those stories that happened between that time totally would have validated Betty and Barney.
Yeah.
You know, they would know that they're not alone too, because people would be like, I saw that too, or I was abducted too, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, it's insane. And get this, John Luttrell, the reporter for the Boston newspaper that came out with that series, he shared this same sentiment. And in 1976, he wrote a letter to nuclear physicist and UFO investigator Stanton Friedman, where he admitted to interviewing between 12 to 14 people in the White Mountain area that also saw a craft that was described just the same that Betty and Barney described on the same night and the same time frame from when they had the abduction.
I just got goosebumps.
Oh, you really did.
Oh my gosh, that's insane.
It's insane. And at the time, John Luttrell's editor for the newspaper didn't think that this was pertinent information to add to the 5-part series, so it never was added.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't know why he did this, but Luttrell, when he left the Boston Traveler, he gave that file to his editor with all the witness information, and funny enough, that file has now since disappeared.
What? The information from the interviews or the information?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Like all the information he gathered from interviewing all of those 12 to 14 people. Gone.
Well, that's convenient.
Isn't it? And perhaps one of the most compelling pieces of evidence is the dress, Betty's dress that she wore that night. So throughout the years, this dress has been tested on so many freaking times, and they found this organic material of some sort that they couldn't identify. And there were a few stains, and those stains have been, they've been tested time and time again. They don't know what it is, not new, you know? But recently, they found 3 stains on the inside of the dress. And at first, you would think, is it menstrual blood? But it was actually in the front, and it was way higher. It was like by the navel area. And so, which lines up with, if you remember, Betty, they stuck a needle. So it's like a little bit, 3 dots. It could be the little bit of blood when you get a prick, you know? And they tested the substance, the liquid, and it was hers. It was Betty's. So that's interesting.
What?
And back in the 1970s, there was a lot of controversy surrounding this, surrounding the Hill abduction. And a school teacher in Ohio actually claimed that this story is real and that she could prove that it's real. And so the reason behind that, so during Betty's dreams and her hypnosis, Betty described seeing a star map that one of the aliens showed her of the routes that they traveled. She had said to the leader, I know you're obviously not from here. Where are you from? And he produced a 3D map out of literal thin air, and it showed a star constellation of their home. And she says it was an oblong map, it wasn't square, and there were all these dots, some just pinpoints and some as big as a nickel. And there were lines connecting some of these dots, and there was one big circle with all these lines going around the circle. So yeah, so the alien showed her this, and he said that the lines were destinations and previous trips. And under hypnosis by Dr. Simon, she actually drew out these constellations.
Oh my.
And Marjorie Fisher, she was a brilliant school teacher, and she had a super high IQ. And in 1974, she claimed to have deciphered that map and figured it out where they were from. She was an amateur astronomer at the time, and
oh my gosh,
she was so freaking smart. And Marjorie, she was the same as Barney. She didn't believe in aliens or anything like that, but she was really interested in the story, and she was like, if it's real, then I would be the one to be able to prove it, you know?
Oh my gosh.
And so she constructed a 3D model, and she began her search. And this was super hard back then, y'all, because there was no computers, there was no little iPad to help you. Like, she had to hand draw all of this.
Yeah, and look through a telescope probably.
Yeah, and books and stuff, you know?
Wow.
And so, yeah, so she copied all of the distance data that was available on the stars in our local galactic neighborhood and the properties of those stars out 50 light years from every direction. So in total, she created 14 different models. And eventually she found it. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, according to her evidence, the beings came from Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system located 39 light years from Earth.
Oh my.
I know. And we actually may never know for sure. It's like, I feel like I know for sure, but we'll never really know for sure. Maybe we will, I don't know. But there's a good possibility that there is, because that area is super rich in exoplanets.
What are the chances that she draws all the stars out and makes all these maps and then she finds the exact one?
Yeah.
Too specific to not be true, almost.
Yeah, for sure, dude.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is so amazing. And the UFO researchers and, you know, just people on the documentary are talking about it afterwards. And, you know, they're talking about the different types of abductions that there's been. And a lot of people say that it's been them trying to figure out the nervous system, the body, their reproductive system. So it kind of leads you to think that they don't have all the answers yet. They don't know exactly what our reproductive system looks like. And so they're thinking, do they just keep coming back to find out? And once they do know what our reproductive system looks like, has their objective changed?
Yeah.
It's very, very, very interesting to think about.
Yeah. There was this story, completely different, and I don't fully understand it, and I obviously don't have all the details, but there was a story of this guy when he was a little kid. He got abducted, and they put a piece of something in his leg.
Oh.
And when he came back, it was like in his leg for a long time, and it started causing pain, so he eventually had it taken out. And he remembered his abduction, and he like told people about it all the time.
I think I remember this.
Yeah, and they took it out, and it was a piece of material that was very similar to glass, but it wasn't from Earth.
Oh my.
It didn't contain any of the chemical components that we have here on Earth. So they were like, okay, your story pans out.
Wow.
But it's like, why? Was it like a tracker? Did they want to track him? And for what reason, you know? Like,
yeah.
I just don't understand. It's so weird.
Oh, so many questions.
So many questions, not enough answers.
Yeah. In another interview they feature in the documentary, she's visibly much older. And she says she literally thinks about this. It's the first thing she thinks of when she wakes up. And it's the first thing she thinks of when she goes to bed. You know, the last thing she thinks of when she goes to bed. Like, this has haunted her entire life. And
she's still alive?
Well, no, at the time she was alive.
Oh, yeah.
But she was like, this will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. Like, she just never stopped thinking about this, you know?
Yeah.
And Betty says, quote, "Of course this happened. There's no doubt in my mind that there are solid crafts and they're astronauts from another solar system because they told me themselves."
Yeah, she experienced it herself, and then she went under hypnosis and remembered all the things that actually happened to her.
Exactly.
It's like, that's so traumatizing, and then half the nation believes you and half of the nation doesn't. It's like, of course it's gonna be on your mind, and then it never happens again, and you're just like, okay, I don't know what to do with this information now.
Yeah. Obviously she has since passed. Her and Betty, they are buried in Kingston, New Hampshire, next to Betty's sister.
Betty and Barney.
Yeah, Betty and Barney. And they interview a family friend, Jim Splain, and he says that although they have passed, they did leave us with a message that there are aliens out there who may be visiting us, might not be harmful, but maybe are just inquisitive about us, and maybe someday they'll say hello. Thought that was sweet.
I hope they do, and I hope they're more
considerate,
ask for consent. If they asked me, I would go.
I think maybe I would. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I would.
I think I would.
I think just knowing what's coming up versus being surprised by it would make all the difference.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? I might fall in love with an alien. You know, it's not about looks.
Like maybe
it's
they're
about
hot.
Yeah, it's about what's inside.
Kind of like The Shape of Water. I do really love that movie.
Yeah, or Shrek.
Or Shrek. I really love Shrek.
I love your makeup. It looks so cute.
Oh, thank you.
I love that dark lip.
Thank you.
Looks really pretty.
Little cottage goth girl.
Beautiful cottage core.
Thank you. So yeah, Betty says, the good question is, why are they coming here? I don't think the government knows any more than we do. They're just as puzzled as we are. I mean, we know they're here. We don't know why they're here. And then another quote, she says, I'm Betty Hill, and my husband Barney and I were the first persons on this planet to have been abducted by astronauts from another solar system. And that is the story of the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill.
Wow. That was an amazing story.
Good
job.
Thank you.
What the heck? I can't believe it's over. I feel like I'm gonna cry.
Yeah, it's
that was really good.
Thank you. This story, I feel it in my veins. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel it in my veins because I 1000% have always believed in aliens. There's literal CIA proof that it's out there. I wouldn't even need it, but it's there. And if you're watching this and you're like, I don't believe in aliens, that's okay.
Yeah, because I'm a skeptic as well.
That's
in
a
case
skeptic.
You don't know.
Yeah. Skeptic girl. Not a girl.
No doubt.
But damn, how could you not?
How could you not? After this
God,
story,
yeah.
I feel like even as a skeptic, sometimes it's fun to just let yourself, you know?
Yeah.
And also, how can you not when it feels like there's literal proof? How can you deny this story? They didn't even want to share this story. Somebody else shared it. Anyways, Kathy and I are going to take a little break while she finishes her makeup, and then we'll be right back and say goodbye.
Yes. Alrighty, that was the end of it, and our makeup is cute.
Yes, it is.
I hope you like this. I hope that it made you feel as passionate about aliens as I am. And be ready for the next video where Celeste is going to tell us something super crazy.
Yes, we hope to see you soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Share it, comment.
Maybe leave a little comment if you're feeling a little frisky.
Do it.
All right, bye guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
All right, should we pause it?
Yeah.
You want to pause the audio and the video at the same time?
Yeah.
Let's do it. And then we got to take selfies.
1,
2, 3.